Hey friends, welcome back to our coaching conversations on shame. We talked about how shame manifests in the body triad yesterday, and today we're going to talk about the heart triad. This is probably the easiest triad to talk about shame in because this is the shame triad. So each triad has a primary emotion that is identified with those three types in that triad, and for 2s, 3s, and 4s, shame is the primary emotion. And as I talked about yesterday, shame is like this coin with two sides. On one side is not enough, I'm not enough. On the other side is I'm too much. And both of those are oriented around, it begs the question of for who? I'm not enough for who? Or I'm too much for who? So often, a lot of the issues that we bump up against with our Enneagram type is that we all somehow have this arbitrary sort of benchmark for which we compare our lives to and try to make sure that we are okay. But okay according to what? We set ourselves up for feeling shame when we believe that there is a right way, that there is a proper way, or that the way others respond to us is the objective way that we should have been in the world, right? So trying to judge, all right, was I too much for you? Was I not enough for her? And constantly orienting ourselves around some arbitrary standard of being is something that we can do a lot of work around. I don't have time to get into that, but that's kind of shame is always revolved around this idea of there's some sort of standard that I'm not measuring up to. Not enough, too much, not enough, too much. And the reason why 2s, 3s, and 4s are called the shame triad is because whereas the body triad, which we talked about yesterday, is oriented to sort of objective truth, the totality of existence, how are things? Are things good enough? Are things just enough? Are things peaceful enough and harmony enough, right? There's this totality of existence. Then when we get down to the mind and the heart triad, we're pulling down the totality of existence into how it relates to me. And it splits off into how does the totality of existence relate to my identity? That's the shame triad, the heart triad, who I am. And how does the totality of existence relate to my safety, which is 5, 6, and 7. That's the mind triad. And the primary emotion for that is fear. And so both the heart and the mind are kind of looking up to Big Brother Body Triad and all the totality of existence. Is the world right? Is the world just? Is the world peaceful? And if it's not, what does that mean for my significance, for my personality, for my standing with others? And how is it for my safety, my standing with sort of the world at large, right? Am I safe? Do I have significance in the world? So heart triad, shame triad, let's get into each type and how shame could manifest. 2s want to know, how do others relate to me in the sense of, do they love me? Do they love me? Reaching out into the world and wanting to know how loved I am, wanting to get love, wanting to do whatever it takes to have enough love because my significance in the world is dependent upon how loved I am. And loved, you need to prove it, right? Love means that I can check off a list. You were there for me. You reached out to me. You provided for my needs. So being loved has very clear strings attached, has very clear benchmarks that I can judge whether someone loved me or not because of what they did for me. Did they talk to me kindly? Did they call me? Did they notice me? Did they ask me how I was doing? Did they provide me something that I needed? Did they show up for me when I needed them to? So for 2s, there's this sort of, am I enough to be loved? Do I have enough significance to be loved? And I will know that if you hit certain benchmarks that I have very clearly in my mind. So if the world is not a good place, not a harmonious place, and not a just place, then 2s are constantly feeling like there's not enough love. There's just not enough love. There's not enough love. There's not enough love. And that fuels this shame. If I were different, if I were better, if I were X, Y, and Z, then I would be loved. But I'm not, so I'm not. So a lot of shame revolves around those benchmarks that a 2 has set up in their mind as this is what proves your love to me, are not getting hit, are not, the love that 2s give so much to others is not being returned. And that is intertangled with their significance and their worth, which means if that gets ripped out, then their worth is in shreds, and then we feel shame. So for 2s, there's that shame of, I'm not enough to be loved, or I'm too much, and people just are freaked out by my intensity to want to help and give and serve, and so I'm not wanted and I'm not loved. That's how it revolves for 2s. For 3s are judging their significance in the world by how successful they are and how much others value them. So it's like my value, in economics, we have this principle of supply and demand. If there's something that we can't get very easily, then we value it more. It's all arbitrary, but we value it more. It has perceived value that is higher. Whereas if there's something that we have plenty of, then its perceived value is lower. And so 3s put a lot of, they define themselves by how others perceive their value. If I'm a hot commodity, if I am something that people have instilled with value, then I have value. But that means my value, again, is intertwined with how others are treating me. And the minute that sort of crumbles, then my worth crumbles with it as well. And then there's that shame of not enough, or the shame of I was too much. I was too much for this scenario. I was too much for this person. And so now that their value in me has crumbled, my value of myself is also crumbled because they're intertwined. And so that's where 3s feel a lot of that shame, is not providing enough value to the world so that others will see it, acknowledge it, and bolster the worth of the 3 through that acknowledgement. Now, for 4s, the desire is to have significance through being fully understood and through being able to be fully authentically expressive, to be able to express their full self and then be seen and understood is something that 4s believe that's what their significance is tied to. So the significance of each type in the shame triad is intertied and intertangled with something outside of themselves, some external validation, which is dangerous, right? So you can see how shame is going to be the go-to thing for 2s, 3s, and 4s, because their value and worth is so intertangled with things outside of themselves that anytime that dips, the worth dips. Anytime that goes up, the worth goes up. It's so dependent on the feedback from others, the response from others, whether 4s often feel too much. They feel too much even for themselves sometimes. The emotions are so much. The vision that they have for their lives is so big, and other people just don't get it, and nobody gets it, and nobody gets them. And so if I'm not seen, I talked about this in the first video, if you're not seen, mirrored, or taken into account, that's the foundation of trauma. So imagine how traumatic a 4's life is every time they don't feel seen, every time they don't feel mirrored, every time they don't feel taken into account. When their worth is tied up in how others perceive them, then it's easily crumbled and easily taken in as shame. And what's interesting with the shame triad, and maybe this is for other triads as well, I'm in the shame triad, so this one's more in my wheelhouse and easy to express and understand. Oftentimes, because our worth is so entangled up with how other people respond to us, even things that aren't about us gets taken as being about us and being about our worth. Right? So this is the danger of taking that very deep and precious piece of you, which is your worth, and hooking it on to something that is so fickle and something that is so up and down. The minute that someone even just sighs heavy and rolls their eyes, and maybe they're all the way across the room, but because my worth is tied up in all of the stimuli that I'm getting from everyone else, that sigh and rolling of the eyes, it's hooked to my worth. It might be nothing about me. It might be nothing about anything that has to do with me. But because I've tied my worth to whatever external stimuli that I'm receiving at the moment, That heavy sigh and rolling of the eyes sends me into being like, I wasn't enough for that person. Maybe I needed to do something different for them. Maybe I'm doing something terrible. Maybe I need to change. Can you see why shame is just that primary emotion for the heart triad? And of course, every triad has shame, but shame it takes a little work for the body triad to get there, right? Their first instinct is anger, things are not right. And then as they try to fix them and maybe they feel like they're too much or not enough, then they experience shame. So it's kind of down the totem pole for the body triad. But for the heart triad, it's right at the surface. It's right at the surface because we've linked our internal worth, which should be so precious and should be ours apart from anything else, and we've linked it to every sort of external stimuli. Did you love me? Did you validate my worth? Do you see and appreciate my authenticity? Right? And so we're just like hungry and needing for all of this validation for our worth. And the minute that something even smells like it's not going to be that, our worth is just like plummeted. So the work that we need to do in the heart triad is to start unlocking, unhooking, detangling our worth from the external actions, thoughts, and words of others. The two are not linked. They are not. We perceive them as such, and that causes lots of problems for us. The minute that we can detangle them is the minute that as the heart triad, we can stand in our power. So I'd love for you to do some work this week, if you're in the heart triad, of just noticing when those moments happen of someone who gives a heavy sigh and rolls their eyes across the room. That's a metaphor, but I'm sure there are those moments where somebody just makes a comment and it's not even about you, and it just sends you in a shame spiral. Or you talk too much in a group, or you talk too little, or you said that thing that could have been taken 20 different ways, but one of those ways could be bad, and so maybe that person's upset with you. You know what I'm talking about. If you're in the shame triad, you know what I'm talking about. Notice those moments when your worth is hooked to the expressions of others, to the stimuli that you're getting from others, their facial expressions, their words, their actions. So often in the shame triad, we are looking for things to validate our shame. Why are we doing that? If we're looking for ways to validate our shame, our not enoughness, our too muchness, we will find it. But it might not actually be there. It's only there because we have put it there. We've searched it out. We've created a figment of our imagination of shame, when in reality, it may not be there. Now, there are definitely times when people try to shame us. But again, unhooking other people's words, thoughts, and actions from our worth will make us shame-proof even against those legitimate attacks on our worth, even against those legitimate attacks on how loved we are, how valuable we are, how significant we are. That's my coaching encouragement for you, is start asking yourself, how can I detangle my worth from others?